Hello and welcome to Türkiye Talks. This week we are going to talk about recent developments in Syria. Turkish and Syrian ministers met in Moscow. I am joined by Necdet Ozcelik, researcher, and Kadir Ustun from Washington. Welcome both.
Hello, Bora.
You probably followed the meeting which took place in Moscow. There are lots of rumors about what has been discussed. On the one hand, as Turkey is heading to an elections, some parts of some people think that Turkey is trying to find a way to solve the refugee problem. And on the other hand, in Syria, people are talking about if Turkish troops will withdraw from the places that they control right now. Also, Iranians were in the meeting, Russians were in the meeting. I would like to start with Necdet Ozcelik. What is the importance of this meeting as Turkey heading to the election? Do you think this is a real major diplomatic event or just a research or exploratory meeting? What is your understanding of that?
Yes, good evening again. Indeed, this kind of talks are not new. So we have been observing that the intelligence agencies of Turkey and of Syrian regime have been talking for years to solve some the tactical problems, some operational problems in the field. But we have not seen this kind of talks have just evolved into a level of an political discussion. So in this sense, what we have been seeing since last December, so this kind of technical talks are just trying to push a little bit to get into diplomatic or the political sense. But what I can call this, these are just the exploratory talks, but not a technical one or not a political one solely. In this sense, this is kind of hybrid talk in between the technical discussions and the political discussions. To make this kind of talks to be or to give an meaning of being political, we need to see at least a meeting in between the foreign ministers. So what we have been seeing just the military representatives, the defense ministers. Yes, they are ministers, but they are mostly dealing with the technical issues, and the intelligence chiefs and some other bureaucratic representatives. So it's a little bit early to talk about a normalization. These talks are just the rapprochement talks or a way of exploratory talks to push whether this is going to make a rapprochement in between two administrations. But we have a lot of challenges. And from Turkish perspective, the elections are just making the Turkish side is a little bit sensitive. And the Syrian regime knows this fact and just trying to make this talks and meetings to be a little bit more complicated, because we have seen the opposition political parties or the representatives from opposition parties in Turkey have pledged to make a concrete, probably some kind of unconditional talks with Syrian administration. This is just encouraging the Syrian politicians and Syrian bureaucrats at the same time. And that's why until the at least end of the election, so the Syrian regime is just trying to approach these talks in a maximalist way to make the situation a little bit more complicated, and then to start a new wave of talks after the election. But I don't think this is going to be make big problems for Turkish, let me say, the counter-terror operations, the humanitarian aids, and cross-border humanitarian activities, and so on. Because this is not just an, the governmental policy. This should be taken as an state policy, and probably we will be seeing important military and security bureaucratic resistance from Turkey to make these talks a little bit more difficult in the case of the election does not result for favor of the current government in Turkey. So it is a little bit early to make some speculations, but yes, there are some developments. There are some preparation from Syrian administration. It's not new. They have been trying to pretend as if a modern state since 2021 because they have been isolated from the international community more than 1 decade, and now they just started to act as if they are complying with the necessities or the characters of the modern state. So let me stop here, then we will talk a little bit later on after our colleague in Washington is going to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Necdet. Kadir, what is your understanding of these meetings? As Necdet said, it is not the first. Turkish and Syrian ministers met before to normalize the relations, but this time also Iranians are also part of it, and Russia is playing an important role. How serious do you think these talks are? And as again Necdet mentioned, lots of challenging issues are pending, like the return of refugees, the situation of terror groups in north part of Syria, especially YPG, which is supported by the United States. Do you think there is enough common ground between Turkey and Syria to find a way to normalize relations?
Well, normalizing relations, like Necdet said, it might be a little too early to talk about, but there are significant Turkish national security concerns, including the refugee situation, and then the PKK, PYD group, whether they can make a deal with the Syrian regime. The first meeting was between defense ministers and intel chiefs in December. Iran was not there, but in the intervening months, they decided to include Iran because Iran is an actor on the ground, and it has influence, it has interests on the ground and influence over the regime as well. Turkish priorities, I think, it's been, I think, under a year that President Erdogan mentioned, talking about potentially normalizing with the Syrian regime. But of course, there are these priorities at the technical level, security level, that need to be taken care of or develop some sort of common interest, common points before you can go to diplomatic full normalization, let's say. I think it will take time for sure, just like Professor Ozcelik mentioned. But the broader context, of course, now there's been quite a bit of a number of developments about Syrian regimes, Syrian government's inclusion in the Arab League, and that is a process that some countries are really pushing hard for that, and that could help end Syrian regime's isolation. So the Syrian regime feels like it has a significant interest there. And if it can appear like it's playing ball with Turkey, that also gives it more sort of visibility and acceptance in the international arena. So the Syrian regime has interest in reaching out and talking to Turkey and other Arab nations. And then we also have the new dynamic. You know, we discussed this with you, Bora, in previous episodes. Iran's normalization with rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. There are many rapprochement efforts throughout the region. So I think post-pandemic, there are movements going on in the region that, regional countries are talking to each other, and there is much less of an interest from Washington and a push for a specific policy, especially in Syria. American policy is reduced to basically, anti-ISIS campaign and some humanitarian work. But other than that, there's no real political solution that Washington is pushing for, and the regional countries have actual things, presence on the ground inside Syria, in northern Syria especially. Turkey is already controlling several areas, and it has interests in, ensuring that there's security and stability in northern Syria, so that some of the refugees voluntarily could go back. There has to be stability and some sort of functioning economy, even if it's locally, for these people to go back. Of course, we don't know how many will be willing to go back, and that will take a long time to establish trust and establish a functioning space. In the regions Turkey controls, there is stability, there is security, but of course, it's as soon as Turkey might pull out of those regions, those won't exist. So you need the agreement of all parties, including the regime and Iranians and Russians, to be able to move forward and create lasting stability. I think this is just the first initial steps of that process, and the Syrian regime starts the negotiations from a more extreme position, like Necdet said. They said Turkey needs to pull out first. That's just not realistic, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. Maybe in the long run, when all the parties agree on a grand bargain, political route, and some sort of political agreement, and security is assured, and there's agreement on how to deal with terror groups and return of refugees. There are many issues to be sorted out, including the humanitarian issues, and then the complication is also that in this four-way meetings, there's no United States included, and the United States is in the region. It has about 1,000 troops, and it's been supporting PYD, and it's been pursuing a policy that is at odds with its NATO partner Turkey, and it doesn't show any signals that it will give up on this policy. So that will also have to be factored in along the way. If these four countries reach some sort of agreement about Turkish-Syrian normalization route, then they're going to need to address the U.S. factor as well. So that's where we are, I think.
Yeah, that's a really interesting situation in Syria. For the last 10 years, we focused on the war, and Turkey was part of it. And actually, I know Necdet from these incidents for 10 years. He was one of the best analysts when it comes to covering that part of the world, Syria. So, Necdet, when you think about the last 10 years and when you look at the next 10 years, if the President Erdogan wins the elections, what kind of pattern you expect? You know, last 10 years, it was the years of Arab Spring, you know, turmoil in the Middle East. Many states collapsed. Libya, Egypt, there was the military coup. Iraq since 2003, it's a mess. And these countries became good basis for international terror networks. And that's why Turkey had to take action, especially in Syria. But still, many of these groups were eliminated, but YPG is still there, and it is backed by the United States. So when you think of this line, you know, I mean YPG, do you think Syria and Turkey and Russia, they are on the same page? Do you think they will work together in the coming years, or they will still try to use it as a bargaining chip or as a leverage against Turkey and each other? What do you see from that point of view?
As you just mentioned, Turkish, Russian, and Syrian position are definitely same in regard with the Syrian territorial integrity and unitarian Syria regarding with the political aspect, let's say. So the U.S. role is completely different in this sense. So the common interest for Turkey, Russia, Syria, even for Iran, that's the whole Syria, territorially and also politically. But for political aspect, we have not seen that the Syrian opposition has not achieved its political establishment. And so the Syrian regime is not ready to accept the Syrian political, Syrian opposition's political assets. So in this sense, this is a big challenge for within the common interest of Russia, Turkey, Syria, and Iran at the same time. Let me just get back to Iranian role of this last talk. So until now, the Iranian position was quite weak regarding with the diplomatic and political developments. But since Iran has increased its support for Russia's war in Ukraine, then we have seen Iran just started this support as a leverage to get involved in the political process in Syria. In this sense, this is something between Russia and Iran. So this is not pretty much regarded with the Turkish position. So in this sense, I do not give the same gravity for Iranian role as in Turkey and Russia as the, let me say, outsider actor. So the problem lies with the United States role. The U.S. future project is not resting on the unitarian nation statehood of Syria. So they have a different agenda from Turkey, from Russia, and other actors. So to invest in a separate agenda or project based on the making the PKK Syrian offshoot of PYD to a legitimate character, just claiming a insurgent autonomous political asset. So what I am just calling the situation, so the US is just shifting all the political, military, and social from PKK center to PYD center. In this sense, what the United States is just doing, the state center of the PKK's KCK project. So in this sense, is probably going to be high or operate center to challenge Syrian. The problem is how Turkey is going located in.
Ses çok gidip geldi.
Can you hear me?
Şu geriye doğru hareket ettiğinizde ses biraz kayboluyor sanki hocam.
Stabil durmaya çalışayım hocam.
Hı hı.
So my concern is the KCK project is going to be operated from this Syrian center around PYD. So we might be seeing PKK's regional role might be weakening, but it is ideological, military, and the territorial objectives is going to be driven by PYD in northern Syria. For Turkey, for Syria, and for Russia at the same time. On the other hand, we have another important problem is the immigrant issues. You know, especially revolving around the opposition political parties in Turkey, we have seen an anti-immigrant sentiment rose in recent years. And without a consultation with the local opposition groups, just pushing the immigrants into Syria might be causing problems, security problems, humanitarian problems, and so on. We have seen Syrian regime has started to pass some laws, just like anti-torture law and amending the penal code and just passing an amnesty decree. So, but these are not just the pulling factors, because none of the Syrian immigrants living in Turkey, in Jordan, or in different countries, they do not believe in the sincerity of Syrian administration. In this sense, some different models are needed to mitigate the concerns of the Syrian.
Yeah. Do you think, Kadir, this is also the case for the US? I mean, Necdet mentioned that the United States is not after a unified Syria, so they have other plans for the region, as far as I understand, right? Do you think, do you also agree, or do you observe this also in the circles in Washington? Do they have actually a strategy for Syria in which Turkey can play a role after normalizing or mending relations with Syria?
Well, there's not much talk about Syria in the first place, and then the vision for Syria does not exist. Many would argue that that doesn't exist for the broader Middle East either. The United States, under Biden administration, it has been very much focused on Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, and staying away from Middle Eastern issues, including the nuclear file with Iran. Biden administration had promised to go back to the agreement, but you know, after it took power, it made an effort to reach an agreement, but you know, those efforts have not succeeded, and there doesn't seem to be much of an interest in pushing for that. Biden administration is not pushing for a peace between Israel and Palestine. It's not really pushing hard on any kind of issues in the Middle East. It's just trying to maintain the status quo. In Syria, you know, the argument for staying there is so that ISIS wouldn't return, and you know, the PYD would not go to, you know, seek a relationship with Russia or Iran. That's the argument, and beyond that, there's not a political sort of thinking what's going to happen about the future of Syria. So in that context, they're not talking about territorial integrity of Syria, or they're not talking about, you know, Turkey normalizing, or, I mean, there's some statements from the White House. They've said, you know, State Department said they don't encourage kind of, you know, these kind of moves towards the Syrian regime because it undermines the sanctions regime. And they don't think, you know, you should normalize with Assad, but they're not coming up with another solution. They're not coming up with, okay, a broad sort of comprehensive lasting peace proposal. So in the absence of that, there's not much of an effort to engage these regional countries to move forward. So it is a difficult, problematic situation, of course. So like, even if Russia and Turkey agreed on a, you know, political solution, that will need to be, you know, negotiated with the United States as well. So there are many moving parts, and I don't think it will be resolved very soon. But at the same time, there are, like Necdet mentioned, in the domestically inside Turkey, the refugee issue has become a serious sort of political, polarizing political issue over the last, let's say, 2 years. And, you know, the government has needed to address this concern. I mean, there was the rise of an anti-immigrant party inside Turkey. They have lost a lot of support in recent months, especially in the wake of the earthquake. But still, there is inside Turkey, you know, there's a lot of people who blame immigrants, I mean refugees, Syrians for a variety of things. So the government, whatever government is going to come after the elections, even if somehow opposition manages to win, you know, they've given even stronger sort of promises to help Syrians go back. But good thing is both sides are emphasizing that it will be a voluntary return, and it will be through negotiations with other powers. Nobody is talking about expelling refugees, because that would create a chaotic situation, and it wouldn't be in the national interest of Turkey either. But so it is a tough issue. That's one of the top priorities for Turkey, and PKK-PYD is going to remain a top priority. I think if you engage the regime, the thinking in Ankara is that you know, you can prevent a deal between PKK and regime. But again, you know, Turkey still will need to deal with this issue of United States supporting PYD. So it is a challenging situation, but the meetings this week, I think it's a serious start. It's not a, it was, you know, it started in December, and this was the second round of meetings, inclusion of Iran, like Necdet said, probably has to do with Iran's support for Russian war in Ukraine. But, you know, it also helps to, you know, they are on the ground at the end of the day. They have done fighting. They can be spoilers on the ground. But I agree with Necdet's assessment. You know, it's going to be some sort of deal that, you know, Turkey and Russia will be the main decision makers on that one. So we'll see what happens, especially after the, you know, elections.
Yeah, definitely. We will see what will happen. With this, we come to the end of the show. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, Necdet. Thank you, Kadir. Hope to see you next time.
Thank you, Bora.